Ein Finger. Zwei Finger. Eine Hand. Zwei Hände. Ein Fuß. Zwei Füße. Ein Problem. Viele Probleme. Ich habe viele Probleme, weil ich die Pluralform nicht verstehen kann.
Dann lass uns darüber reden. Das hier ist Lernen und Fahren.
The time has come to talk about something that I've been deliberately putting off since day one. Every example that I have given since the very first episode have all been in the singular. Why? Well, that was a deliberate decision because I thought that trying to introduce the plural forms too soon in the process would be a little overwhelming. The plural forms in German are a little bit tricky, and I didn't want to do too much too soon. But we can't avoid it forever. And sooner or later, you need to be able to talk about more than one person, place, or thing. So let's talk about the plural forms in English and German and see how they compare and contrast. Let's start with English. How do we form the plural in English? Well, generally, you can just stick an S on the end of a noun and you've got the plural form. So singular, the cat, the dog. Plural, the cats, the dogs. Great. Now sometimes this involves a pronunciation shift. For example, the house. In the plural form, we don't say the houses. It's subtle, but that sharp S at the end of house softens. It changes to more of a Z sound in the plural. The houses. Also note that the single syllable word house becomes two syllables in the plural. Keep that in the back of your head because we're going to be revisiting that. Now, it would be great if sticking an S on the end of a noun in English would always reliably give you the plural form. But unfortunately, it doesn't. There's a lot of irregular plural forms in English that you unfortunately just have to memorize. For example, the mouse, singular, should be the mouses in plural, but it isn't. It's the mice. Why? It just is. The goose, singular, should be the gooses in the plural, but it isn't. It's the geese. Okay, so I guess the rule there is if there's a double O in the singular form, then to get the plural form, you change the double O to a double E, right? So the plural of book should be beak. Well, no, it isn't. It's just an irregular form that you have to memorize. The plural of person, actually there is a word in English, persons, but it's rarely used. The plural of person in casual conversation is usually people. The spelling and pronunciation changes completely in the plural form. And these irregular plurals just kind of have to be memorized. Now, if that was it would be a pretty short video, but there's more. In English, we also have to worry about something called subject-verb agreement. What is that? Well, if you pluralize the subject of a sentence, you have to change the form of the verb that is used in that sentence. For example, the dog is friendly, singular. If we want to pluralize that, we have to change not only the word dog to dogs, but we also have to change the verb that goes with it. The dogs are friendly. Now, fortunately for us in English, that's about where it ends. That's about as complex as it gets in English. We don't have to change our article, as we've discussed a few times in previous episodes. The word the doesn't care about plurality. Neither do our adjectives. So the friendly dog, singular, the friendly dogs, plural. The word the and the word friendly do not have to change form between singular and plural, which is really nice. But now let's look at German. How do we form the plural of a noun in German? Well, unfortunately, there isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of rule of thumb where you can just stick a single consistent word ending onto a noun to get the plural form. There's a bunch of different ways to pluralize nouns depending on the noun. Let's start with the easy ones. Grammatically feminine nouns in the German language will usually end with N in the plural. Sometimes you have to mess with the spelling a little bit to get there. And yeah, there's a few oddball exceptions to this, but generally speaking, grammatically feminine nouns will end with an N in the plural. For example, die Katze, the cat. To pluralize that, you just stick an N on the end of it. Die Katzen. Sometimes we have to add an EN, which changes the number of syllables in the word. For example, die Frau, the woman. If we follow the example of the cat and just stick an N on the end of it, you think it should be something like die Frauen. Sounds like the English word frown, but it isn't. We add an EN to that one, and it changes the number of syllables in the word. The same way that the single syllable English word house becomes two syllables, houses, in the plural form, the single syllable word Frau in German becomes two syllables, Frauen, in the plural form. Now, what about grammatically feminine nouns that already end in the letter N in the singular? How do we pluralize them? You can't just stick another N on the end, can you? Well, actually you can. There are several words like this in German, and specifically I'm thinking about the names of occupations. There's a masculine and feminine form for these in German. We don't really do this in English, but for example, der Lehrer, the teacher. If you stick an IN suffix on that, it becomes feminine. Die Lehrerin is the female teacher. And you might notice that the definite article der for der Lehrer changed to die for die Lehrerin. The female teacher is grammatically feminine in German, even though the word teacher or Lehrer is grammatically masculine. Why? Well, think all the way back to episode 2 when we talked about grammatical gender. We mentioned a few times in that episode that the grammatical gender of a noun does not necessarily reflect on the actual gender of the person, place, or thing that noun refers to, but there are exceptions to that, and this is one of those exceptions. When we form the feminine version of an occupation name, like der Lehrer, the teacher, die Lehrerin, the female teacher, or der Fahrer, the driver, die Fahrerin, the female driver, we not only add that feminine IN suffix to the word, but we change the grammatical gender of that word to feminine as well. Okay, but back to the topic at hand. How do we pluralize Lehrerin if it already ends with the letter N? Well, you can add an NEN. And you get die Lehrerinnen, which is the female teachers, plural. That's a bit of a mouthful, but that innen suffix you'll see quite a lot. Die Fahrerinnen, the female drivers. Die Lehrerinnen, the female teachers. The general rule of thumb there is that grammatically feminine nouns in the German language, and yeah, there's exceptions to this, but by and large, they will end with the letter N in the plural form. Okay, great. But what about grammatically masculine and grammatically neuter nouns? Well, here's where it gets a little bit complicated, because there's several different ways that these nouns can be pluralized. Let's break it down and go through the different ways that we might see these nouns being pluralized. One way is just to add an E to the noun. This changes the number of syllables in the noun, as we've seen in previous examples. So for example, der Hund becomes die Hunde. In German, we notice two things. The single syllable word Hund, meaning dog, became two syllable Hunde, meaning dogs, in the plural. We also notice that the definite article changed from der to die. Why? Are we saying groups of dogs are feminine? Nope. What we're seeing here is yet another way of saying the in the German language. And this applies to nouns of any grammatical gender in the plural, in the nominative case and the accusative case. It is die. And yes, this is confusing because die also refers to grammatically feminine nouns in the singular nominative and accusative. They're reusing this article, as we've seen with other articles, like der, it gets reused in different contexts, in different cases, to mean different things. Other nouns in German will take an ER ending instead of an E ending. So for example, das Kind, the child in German, becomes die Kinder in the plural. Perhaps you're familiar with the joke, Canadian children are kind, but German children are kinder. Kinder. I guess that joke only works if you see it written down. The word kinder in German, meaning children, looks like the English word kinder. But it's not pronounced the same, so the joke doesn't work. Moving on. Some words in German will undergo what's called an umlaut shift or a vowel shift. What is that? Well, if you've looked at the German written language at all in your language learning efforts so far, you'll have noticed that the German alphabet is very similar to the English alphabet, but they have a few extra characters that we don't have in English. Specifically, I'm going to talk about the umlauted characters. An umlaut is the little two dots that can appear above letters. There's three vowels in the German alphabet, A, O, and U, that can take an umlaut, which changes the pronunciation. Now, an umlaut shift is when a noun that doesn't contain an umlaut in the singular will have one in the plural. So, for example, der Apfel, the apple, in the plural is die Äpfel. We notice there's no suffix that we stick onto the end of the word to pluralize it, but we do change the A to an A umlaut, and it changes the pronunciation. And some words, just to confuse things a little more, you get a double whammy. You get a suffix added to the end of the word to pluralize it, and there's an umlaut shift. For example, der Stuhl in German means the chair. You might recognize the English word Stuhl, which is a special kind of chair in English that doesn't have a back or armrests on it. In German, Stuhl just means chair, a chair of any kind. In the plural, we do an umlaut shift to change the U to a U umlaut, and we stick an E on the end of it. The plural of Stuhl in German is die Stühle. And some words will take an ER suffix and an umlaut shift at the same time. For example, das Buch in German. You'll recognize the English word book comes from the German word Buch. And the plural of Buch in German is Bücher, die Bücher. There's an umlaut shift and an ER suffix. Now that's a dizzying array of different ways that you can pluralize words. It's a lot to remember. But hang on, because we're not done yet. Certain words, and these are, I think, mostly words that are imported into the German language from foreign languages, they don't pluralize using any of the methods we've looked at so far. They instead just get an S on the end of them, which should look very familiar because that's exactly what we do in English. For example, das Hotel in German. Hotel is not a German word, but it's been imported into the German language. So the plural of hotel is die Hotels, which should look really familiar because that's English. Das Restaurant, same deal, die Restaurants. Unfortunately, some words that have been imported into German end with a Y, and the Germans, instead of changing that Y to an IES, they will just stick an S right after the Y, which looks terrible. Das Baby, you can guess what that means. It was taken directly from English. The plural is die Babys. Oh, das Repository, taken from English. The plural is die Repositories. Oh, okay, no, sorry, take it off the screen. Take it off the screen. I can't stand that pluralization form. It's terrible. It just feels wrong. Now, in both languages, there are words that don't change form between singular and plural. For example, in English, if I said, "Oh my God, look at the moose over there," you have no way of knowing until you turn around and look whether I'm talking about the singular moose or the group of moose, because the plural of moose should be mooses, or maybe meese if you follow the example of goose. But it's neither of those. It's moose. The plural of moose is in fact moose, which is confusing. Similar thing happens in German, but it's a little less confusing in German, surprisingly. For example, to go back to the teacher, der Lehrer. What's the plural of Lehrer? Well, it's Lehrer. This sounds like it should be confusing, but it's a little bit less confusing in German. Think about it. If I say, ich sehe die Lehrer, that cannot mean I see the singular teacher. Why? Because I used die, which is the plural article. If I meant to say, I see the singular teacher, it would be, ich sehe den Lehrer. You can tell by which article is used whether it's singular or plural, even though the noun itself doesn't change form. Unlike in English, where the moose could either be singular or plural. Now, subject-verb agreement is a thing in German also, just like it is in English. In fact, it's almost identical to how we do this in English. The dog is friendly. Remember, in English, if we pluralize that, I have to change not just the noun dog to dogs, but also the verb has to change to match the plurality. Same thing in German. Der Hund ist freundlich. To pluralize that, we say, die Hunde sind freundlich. We note three things there. We change the noun Hund became Hunde. To pluralize it, we change the verb ist became sind for the exact same reason that is becomes are in English. And we changed the definite article from der to die. That's the one thing we don't do in English. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't stop there in German. Inflection is more complex in German than it is in English, almost always. And the plural forms are no exception. So, what else has to change in German? Well, sometimes the adjectives have to change as well. In the nominative and the accusative case, the adjectives will take a different ending depending on whether or not you're using the definite article or one of the possessive articles. If you think back to episode 4, I think it was, when we were talking about the accusative case, we talked about how using the definite versus the indefinite article can change the word ending for adjectives in a sentence. Remember, the example we used was der freundliche Hund versus ein freundlicher Hund. Similar thing happens in the plural, where if you use the definite article or a possessive article, the adjective will take an en ending. Whereas if you don't use one of those articles, then the adjective just takes an e ending. So for example, if you want to say the friendly dogs, it's die freundlichen Hunde. Freundlichen Hunde. Why? Because I said die. If I say his friendly dogs, similar thing, seine freundlichen Hunde. But if I just say friendly dogs without an article in front of it, it's freundliche Hunde. This is a bit confusing, and it's very easy to get this wrong. The good news is that if you do get it wrong, it's an extremely minor mistake, and your meaning will be perfectly well understood. If you say die freundliche Hunde, okay, that's wrong. I was supposed to stick an N on the end of that adjective because I used the definite article, but it's no big deal. You'll be understood. Now, let's talk about the dative case. The dative case, as usual, is more painful than it feels like it should be. The dative case is the hardest case in the German language, and the plural form is no exception. A lot of inflection happens in the dative case plural. Not just the definite article and not just the adjectives, but the nouns themselves undergo additional inflection to show plural forms in the dative case. And we are introduced to yet another way of saying the in the German language. It applies to nouns of any grammatical gender in the dative plural, and it is, wait for it, den. Wait, what? Come on. We've used den. Den applies to grammatically masculine singular nouns in the accusative case. You know, normally I would make a joke here about how the Germans keep reusing definite articles across different cases. Normally I'd make a joke, but it's getting to the point where it's not funny anymore. It's genuinely frustrating. Why do they do this? Why don't they just have different words to cover these different meanings? You have to try to keep it all separate in your head, even though they keep reusing the same words. It's frustrating. You gotta push through it. So if I want to say I'm playing with the dogs, remember with in German is mit, and remember that mit is a dative preposition, so its object is expressed in the dative case. So it's ich spiele mit den Hunden. We notice two things there. The plural article die changed to den because we're in the dative case, and the word Hunde, which already means dogs, had to undergo additional declension to express the dative plural. It became Hunden. Why? Because in the dative case pretty much everything ends with the letter N. Same thing applies to adjectives. And in fact, things get a little bit easier here in the dative case because that rule I recited earlier about adjective endings taking an N or not taking an N depending on whether you're using the definite article, that does not apply in dative. In the dative case, the adjectives will always take an EN ending, no exceptions. This actually makes it a little bit easier. So I'm playing with the friendly dogs. Ich spiele mit den freundlichen Hunden. I'm playing with friendly dogs. If I omit the word the, it doesn't matter. Ich spiele mit freundlichen Hunden. A little bit easier. I'm playing with his friendly dogs. Ich spiele mit seinen freundlichen Hunden. Now, adding an N to the noun applies almost without regard to how that noun was pluralized. So even if the noun was pluralized with an ER suffix, I'm playing with the children. Ich spiele mit den Kindern. Kindern takes an N on the end in the dative plural. The only exception to this, adding an N to the noun in the dative plural, is the nouns that are pluralized with the letter S. For example, I'm negotiating with the hotels would be ich verhandle mit den Hotels. The word hotels does not get a letter N at the end because it's a kind of an irregular pluralized form, I guess. If I want to say I'm playing with the babies, it would be ich spiele mit den Babys. We don't add an N to oh god, okay, sorry, no. Take that off the screen, please take it off the screen. I can't stand looking at the word babies, it's terrible. No! Okay, so let's talk about the genitive case. The genitive case is not that bad in the plural form. In fact, if you go back to episode 6 when we talked about the genitive case, specifically the section of episode 6 where we talked about grammatically feminine nouns, singular, in the genitive case, everything that you learned there in that section applies here also, which is kind of nice. And we're introduced to the last way of saying the in the German language. It took 13 episodes to get here, but this is the last entry in that table of all the different ways to say the in the German language. We finally made it to the last one. It applies to nouns of any grammatical gender in the genitive case plural, and it is, wait for it, der. What? Yes, they reused der one last time, just as a final insult to injury. It's a little frustrating, but it is what it is. So, all of the articles will change to have an R at the end. So eine changes to einer, seine changes to seiner, it's unserer, und deiner, und etc., etc. So the roofs, plural, of my houses, plural, would be die Dächer meiner Häuser. You'll notice a couple of things. Number one, the plural of Dach, or roof, is Dächer. It gets an umlaut shift, and it gets the ER ending. And number 2, we notice that the in the plural genitive case is der, same as grammatically feminine singular. And adjectives will always take the en ending in the genitive case plural as well, same as the dative case, so it's not too bad. Now let's go back to subject-verb agreement for a second, because there's something kind of interesting that happens between English and German. There are certain nouns that are always referred to in the plural in English, even though there's only one of them. This is weird when you think about it. It's the kind of thing that you never really think about if you grew up speaking English. It's just something that you've always kind of accepted. There's 3 that come to mind off the top of my head. 1, I'm wearing a pair of pants right now. But why do we pluralize pants? It's one article of clothing. And why is it a pair of pants? Why don't we just say, I'm wearing a pant right now? Another one is glasses. I like your new glasses, but why is that plural? It's just one thing. Why can't I just say, I like your glass? And then another one is scissors. There's a pair of scissors on the table, but why is it a pair of scissors if there's only one of them? This is kind of an oddball in the English language. It's probably there for historical reasons, but who knows? Now, in the German language, these nouns are referred to in the singular, which seems odd at first, but it makes perfect sense when you think about it. In fact, the German way makes more sense than the English way. Die Hose ist auf dem Bett. Literally, that is, the pant, singular, is on the bed. The scissors are on the table. Die Schere ist auf dem Tisch. Literally, the scissor is, singular, on the table. Die Brille ist da. The glasses, literally, the glasses is there, singular. But we don't say it that way in English. The German way actually makes more sense because we're referring to one singular thing. It's English that's odd in those examples. And there you have an overview of the plural forms in English and German and how they compare. It took 13 episodes to get here, but now, at last, we can express things in the plural form across the 2 languages.